Welcome, friends. My name is Tay Nix, and in these short videos, I want to try to just spell out certain important topics. And the topic for today that I think if you're paying attention and if your freedom matters to you in the years ahead, which is really what we care about here at Expat Files, the topic is the idea of America. We'll start there, and then I'll finish with something really practical so that I'm not just waxing philosophical for no reason. What's taking place today is very, very dangerous. Anybody should be able to figure that out at this point, but the idea of America, contrary to all the noise and nonsense that you hear today, was something very, very unique in the whole sweep of human history. Never before had a group of people come together and agreed on essentially the basic thing that made America the light of the world for so many decades, and that is being lost right in front of our faces. And not just since 2020, right? But that has been coming for quite some time. The idea of America is that there's limitation on what the government is allowed to do. And that all throughout human history, it was always the case that a group of elites, right, a king and his nobles, right, whether you go all the way back to the Assyrian Empire, in the very cradle of Middle Eastern civilization and the various dynasties that grew out of that, all the way through to Greek and Roman times, all the way through to even the British Empire, right, the one that preceded the American Empire. There was a notion that, right, the peasants were going to take their place and just sort of suffer, and too bad for them. And then this idea of America came along, and it was always the case that the elites, the rules didn't apply to the people who were in charge, whether that was a king or some kind of aristocracy, and that they could absolutely get away with murder, and that the institutions were set up and geared that way. And then along came the idea of America. And for any flaws in its implementation, it was singularly unique in the fact that the entire thing was based on, no, the government actually isn't allowed to do certain things to the citizens. And people respected it. I mean, to a greater or lesser degree, the idea itself, even as a custom, was observed for, you might say, several centuries. I mean, it's hard to define when exactly this idea was finally or was first infringed upon on the kind of scale that we see today. And so I have my own thoughts and my own opinion about that. Really, the creation of an empire began in the 1890s in the war with Spain, in which the United States really reached out and said, no, we're going to take the Philippines. The Filipinos didn't get to say anything about it, except that, you know, several 100,000 were killed in the defense of their country. But that's when the US really crossed into, hey, we're going to be an empire too. And you can't have empire and this idea that the individual is free from incursion by the government at the same time. And so what happens abroad is now happening at home. And this very, very delicate, beautiful, really important idea, obviously, if you look at what happened in the history of the human species, the human race, it was in America that individuality took root, and that the incredible flowering of creativity and productivity was all a result of people being left alone and allowed to do justly perform what tasks and duties they saw fit, so long as you didn't aggress or commit fraud against your fellow citizens, your fellow yoke mates, and that the productivity and the incredible wealth that was created out of that basic idea that the government has to hands off, right? The government has no place running your life and imposing all kinds of arbitrary. Remember, a government is just a group of people, and it's not some other thing. It's not some omnipotent well, it may be omnipotent as far as human beings are concerned, but it's not some omniscient, all-knowing kind of power that comes up with the right answers for the right reasons and applies them, in the correct situations. That's not probably a lot of the trouble that we see around us, is the belief that there's still so many people that I come across in my daily life. And admittedly, I straddle a big chasm here because I live with people who also understand that there's real danger afoot now in what is taking place. And I live with people who are absolutely oblivious but willfully blind to what is taking place. The complete breakdown of trust in institutions, whether it's the financial sector, the medical establishment, all of these things that we're watching unfold before our very eyes, and the tremendous push toward the collective belief. You will believe what the collective group tells you to believe, and that's going to be enforced as the official opinion by the people in power. And that if you don't believe it, you're going to be thrown off the internet, or worse, right? Have your wealth confiscated and what have you. And that we're watching this play out in real time. And there doesn't seem to be any way to stop it right now. And my solution to this, and my suggestion to all of you is, and I want to talk about now the second portion of the idea of America. With good reason, people ask me, but what about your obligation to where you come from? To your home country, to your nation. First of all, the idea that your country is the best because you were born there is preposterous on its face. I know people think this, and I know people believe this. I suppose if you do, good luck to you, but it is also, it's not incorrect to point out that's a species of vanity that is almost breathtaking in its scope. The idea that because you were born someplace, it must be the best place is, of course, laughable if you see it through a certain lens. If the United States was exceptional and was worth being proud of, it was worth being proud of because of the ideals that are now being lost, because of this ideal of individuality. Individuality it matters to each of us. Other cultures, say China, for example, have a cultural belief that, well, if a few individuals need to suffer for the good of the group, well, then that's just fine because the group dynamic matters more. So it's not like every other place on earth believes that the individual is an important unit of society. What we discovered and what we defended and what we believed and what we proved was actually a superior way of conducting business between people, was the idea that the individual is best suited to his or her own decision making. That in your life, you're going to know more about what's going on and which direction you should go, or which thing you should choose, or which path in all the thousands of different decisions you make during the day, that you're the best qualified to make those decisions for your own life. And increasingly, you're going to see, we are seeing, that those decisions that you are best qualified to make are not going to be made by individuals, but are going to be set by a kind of group standard that you will be required to adhere to. And so, what is the ideal that you're defending if you're a patriot? I would submit to you, and I understand that people disagree, but it's an emotional disagreement every time I see it. I would suggest to you that the standard that is worth defending is the idea that you are the best expert for living your own life. And that the idea of collectivism has never proven in any circumstance to be a better situation for people to live in. The perversion of, and I do mean that word intentionally, the perversion of individuality in the United States and in Western culture in general is the line past which individuality now imposes and infringes. In other words, freedom is largely a negative restraint. It is the restraint of others not aggressing against your person or your property. And the idea of individuality, as it has come to be understood in 2023, as I'm filming this, is, hey, I'm such a unique flower and snowflake of an individual that I get to impose my fantasies on other people. The biggest example of this you see now is in this wild, insane, unbelievable movement toward gender fluidity and like whatever, you got something swinging between your legs, but you're going to pretend like you're a woman, right? This kind of thing. And that other people are required to take that seriously instead of calling it what it is, which is kind of mental instability, to be sure. And maybe people feel this way, and maybe this whole thing is happening because we have a very, very difficult time having any kind of honest discussion about sex in our culture. And maybe that's all catching up to us. Who knows, right? But in the absence of traditional roles, this thing has now run amok. And the idea of individuality now has been perverted to the point where, right, the whole notion is I get to impose my individuality on other people. That's the antithesis of liberty. That's the antithesis of individual rights, which itself is a redundancy. There's no other kind of rights other than individual rights. And the rights of the individual are the rights, first of all, to be left alone by others. And that the proper role of any government, any state, so constituted, is to protect the individual from aggression and fraud by others, including the state itself. This was a revolutionary idea. It was imperfect in its implementation, and it's almost gone. And it may disappear utterly in our lifetime. We believe here, and I believe it as I put this material together for you, I believe, and I created the expat files to help us navigate this very difficult time that we're going into, because I believe we're going to see real fireworks in the years ahead. And that things quite easily could get much worse for much longer than anybody is currently thinking. And that we're going to need ways and ideas and thoughts and places, right, where people of goodwill can get together, people who understand and respect the notion of individuality, the idea of America, that it can live and will live on in the hearts and minds and in the communities of people who really understood it and who have a loyalty to that rather than to an idea of a nation state. To say you're a patriot and that you're going to, right, stay put and defend America, right? What you're talking about is defending and also standing up for the government and the status quo. That is not only not there to protect you, but is actively seeking to harm its own citizens, whether that's through forced injections, the mandating of vaccines for children, confiscation of wealth, et cetera, that all of these things are a real threat to you at this time, especially if you've been productive, especially if you've done a good job accumulating wealth, especially if you've been busy at work, right? Crafting and creating your own fortune. If you have money that you hope to pass on to future generations, you're in very dangerous waters right now. And I created the expat files to try to deal with these issues, but also to talk honestly and very soberly about what's taking place. The mere fact that some of these things that I have to say could get me thrown off, various platforms is proof enough that we're in really unprecedented times. And I know people use the word unprecedented so much now, it's precedented. But in this case, I'm referring to the real reversal of all the values, the real throwing overboard of all the things that we held to be true and valuable and and beautiful about the idea of America. And so that's a bit of a roundabout way of introducing you to the expat files. I'll come back in another, I'm going to keep these short, but you have to, I think you have to think for yourself on the idea of patriotism. If your loyalty is to the idea of individual liberty, you're going to have to go abroad to find them increasingly. In some ways, the United States government is the biggest threat to everybody on the planet. The blowing up of Nord Stream, this cockamamie war with Russia that could easily blow up into something much bigger and much worse, like we have not seen in our lifetimes. This is how serious wars begin. And the printing of money, everywhere you look, right, we are backed into a corner, and the leadership, and I use that term very generously, is very unable to deal with the problems that they've created, almost as if they don't really understand what's going on. And that the most likely outcomes, the most probabilistic outcomes, whether it's more money printing, or more violence, or more police presence at home, surveillance, right, censorship, all the rest, all of these trends are well established and in motion. And that there's real danger that probably those things are not only going to continue, but continue to worsen. And so looking abroad, or even finding a place, a portion of North America, which I'm a big fan of, is you're not too late to do that, but it is late. There is not much time for you to establish yourself in such a way that you can ride out whatever trouble is coming and then prepare for a brighter day, the dawn of a new kind of bull market, if you will, in North America. We're not there yet. There's going to be some real ugliness before anything really starts to improve, because we're nowhere near the bottom as far as I can see. But those of you who wonder and question, my thinking about all of this is the idea of America is very worth defending. It's a beautiful idea. It's by far the most inspiring thing that humanity ever came up with on this kind of scale. The United States was truly exceptional because of the ideas that held her together and that people respected and that were understood to be different than the way the rest of the world worked. And you didn't have to wonder about it. People who came from other parts of the world, like old Europe, Soviet Union, right, Cuba, all the places in the world, who said, we've already seen where all these shitty ideas lead us. We want to be over here where you're actually left alone by the elite. And what you're getting in the United States increasingly, and heaven help us if this trend doesn't stop and reverse, is exactly what the rest of the world has already experienced for centuries. And that's worth being really diligent and really, it's worth it to you to try to find a way to preserve your own person, your family, and your wealth. And that's what the Expat Files is all about. Staying put and fighting the government is a pretty fast track to oblivion. To put it mildly, my friends, you will not fight the government. If things get ugly enough, they're going to have the last word, and that's that. The good news is we live at a time when it is not only possible, but it's easier than ever to set yourself up internationally and to put distance between you and the number one risk that you face right now, which is going to be your home government. If you're in the US or Canada and you're watching this, that's what you're up against. And the Expat Files can help you with that. If you want my personal help setting yourself up with a residency, some of the places also where it's actually great to have a sort of plan B are fabulous investments right now. There's real growth going on in a lot of the developing parts of the world. And these are very pleasant, very exciting, beautiful places for the most part. And if nothing terrible happens, as my dark imaginings tell me, well then in the worst case you have a vacation getaway. right? That you can hold for a few years, use it if you need it, and then sell at a profit, as I have done in the last 25 years. But if you don't have a place to go and you aren't set up, you could be facing real hard times. Having a plan B in place has no downside right now, and potentially a ton of upside, but at a bare minimum, you have a secure place for you and your family to ride out tough times. That's what I want for all of you. If there's something I can do to help you expedite this process, expedite your own journey into the expat kingdom, then by all means, get in touch with me. Thank you. That's enough out of me. I'll be back in more to come.